Hello and welcome to my channel where we talk about books and bookish subjects. Today I want in this video to talk about To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which I recently read for the first time. This is a very popular book and very widely read book. It's assigned in schools everywhere in America, but it's not in Denmark, and therefore I hadn't read it before. But it is a well-beloved book globally. It was published in 1960 and it's set in 1935 during the Depression in Alabama. So the way I want to structure this video is I want to talk a little bit about the book, why I thought it was great, and then I want to touch upon a couple of topics. One, I want to touch upon the so-called author controversy about who actually wrote this book. I want to touch about the systemic racism that it portrays and whether that's problematic from a contemporary point of view. And I want to talk especially about, in that regard, the character of Atticus Finch. But for those who may not know or who have not read it for a while, To Kill a Mockingbird is a coming of age story told through the perspective of the protagonist, Scout Finch. She has a brother, Jem, and a father, Atticus. Her father is a lawyer, and their mother is dead, died in childbirth. So there is also Calpurnia, who is the black housemaid, and who functions as alternates between sort of a surrogate mother figure and a friend figure for Scout, depending on what Scout needs in the situation. So the real topic of the book is when Atticus gets appointed to defend Tom Robinson, who is a black man who is falsely accused of raping a white girl. This being a jury-based court in Alabama in 1935, we know as the reader that if this book is going to be in any way realistic, then there will be no doubt about the outcome of that trial. But now, when we talk about whether this book is problematic because it uses the N-word a lot, it certainly has simplified and you can say incomplete portrayals of colored people, and it portrays quite a lot of prejudice. But the crux of the situation with this book is that it's viewed through the eyes of Scout, who is a 7-year-old girl, and who is based on, to some extent, on Harper Lee's own childhood experiences. In that sense, it shares a literary style with Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, which is also a story told from a child that is sort of observing an adult world that the child doesn't fully understand. Atticus Finch is this good moral man who is doing his utmost to defend Tom Robinson, and who is sort of providing moral guidance to his children, Scout and Jem. But we don't really get into that whole trial situation until we're about 1/3 way through the story. Before that, it's a recollection of childhood by Scout and her brother, and Dill, who is a cousin of sorts from out of town who arrives to spend his summers with the Finch family in Alabama, and the character who is based on Truman Capote, who was Harper Lee's close friend. And that also leads to one of the topics I want to touch upon, which is the so-called author controversy about this book. Because there are some interesting things about Harper Lee. She most likely never wrote anything else than this book. Now, some years ago, there was published a so-called sequel, and the title escapes me, Go Set the Watchman, or something like that. But there was a whole controversy around that publication because Harper Lee did not want it to be published. She was old at the time, and there are discussions around whether or not she was fit to give the consent. It was published by the publisher as a sequel that Harper Lee wrote, but there are quite a lot of indications that it was instead a first draft for To Kill a Mockingbird, and that when the editor in the 50s read that, they thought that the strongest part of that narrative was the flashback to Scout's childhood, which in the original draft was only a small portion of the book. But since the editors thought that was the most interesting part, then the whole book got revised into the story that we now know in To Kill a Mockingbird. Some people think, and I don't really know how much you know the credit to give to it, but some people think that Truman Capote had at least some hand in writing this book. He was a friend of Harper Lee. I have not read Truman Capote well enough to really know if his style is reflected in the final text to this book. But I do find it curious that Harper Lee never wrote anything else. I know there are some authors that are one and done or have one masterpiece, but a lot of them have more writing, especially when you have such an international success as To Kill a Mockingbird was. It won the Pulitzer Prize, and it was also, very well received popularly. It was an instant bestseller and has been in print and as bestseller ever since. 40 languages it's been translated to, sold millions and millions of copies. Now, I don't mean to take any credit away from Harper Lee. I don't think that um, I have not seen any evidence that Truman Capote actually wrote this. And in any case, I don't think it's that simple. It is entirely possible that he gave input to it, that he might have come with some suggestions, that he might have edited something, that he might have helped Harper write it with more dramatic tension. And you can maybe support that theory by the fact that the first book that she wrote, which got published as a sequel, and I haven't read it, but what I've heard is that it's not very good, and it's a completely different type of story. So how did she go from that draft to then writing this book, which is very different, without any assistance whatsoever? I guess that's where the controversy starts from. But enough about that. The second thing is this book also gets quite a lot of criticism from a contemporary point of view in terms of its portrayal of racism. And I think that's just absolute bollocks. This is viewed through Scout's perspective. So the idea that Atticus Finch is this white savior type um, is because you're viewing it through the eyes of Atticus's 7-year-old daughter. And you're viewing it through her romanticized and you can say a romanticized and idolized views of her father. And that goes for the whole story. And that also ties into, I think, why this book is so well loved, because it is extremely well narrated. It has a lot of emotional punch, but it is more accessible and more easygoing than you would think when you realize that the topic of the book is a falsely accused black man that gets convicted by a jury, even though there can be no possible doubt about that he is innocent, and frustrated and having given up on the hope that white men will eventually come to his rescue, he desperately tries to run away and gets shot and killed. Um, it's a pretty bleak story with a pretty tragic sort of resolution, but somehow it doesn't feel as a very, you know, bleak narrative. And I think that ties into why it's so beloved, because it allows people to read something serious about a serious and important topic, but they're being sort of cuddled a bit at the same time because of this perspective from Scout and the humor in it as well, which is very similar to Mark Twain's humor in Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain is more ironic, and Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird is more sort of straightforward. But all in all, I have to say this was a great book. I loved it. I think it has emotional impact. I think it's very well narrated. It's clever in a lot of points, and it's extremely engaging. And it's a tragedy, and it's a coming of age story. And Scout is a wonderful character. So is Jem. So is Dill. Dill is brilliant, and I can definitely see the Truman Capote um, inspiration that has been for this character. So I don't think it's a controversial book. I think it's a great book. I would. I'm guessing most people have read it. If you, for some reason, haven't read it, you certainly should. This would be the kind of book that I would feel comfortable blindly recommending to most people, even people who don't read that much, because it's very easygoing. It's very compelling. It's very gripping. Great characters. Great plot. Um, yeah, there's a lot to like in Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. If you want to see more videos like this, like and subscribe to my account. And yeah, I'll see you around. Thank you.